on YouTube and every place else live stream interview. And what I'm really excited about, given Zenny62 Media Incorporated, and to talk about news and its speed and its effect on our brain. It's my pleasure to introduce this man right here, Henry Mahncke, Dr. Henry Mahncke of your company again.
Posit Science is where I work.
Posit Science. I love that. Tell everyone what Posit Science does in San Francisco.
Posit Science, we make brain training programs. So my background is actually as a neuroscientist. I did a PhD in neuroscience back in the day, studied how the brain worked. And Posit Science was the brainchild, one might say, of my PhD advisor, Dr. Michael Mahncke. And what he was working on, and most of us, or all of us really in his lab, was, hey, how does the brain reorganize itself through learning and change and experience? And one day Mike called me up and said, hey, we've spent a lot of time helping rats and monkeys get better, faster, sharper brains through learning and training. Probably about time to help some people get better, faster, sharper brains through learning and training. So he started a company with his colleague, Jeff Zimmern, and I joined as the first employee. And what we make are brain training programs that work, brain training programs that are based on science, that have been through randomized controlled trials, and are shown to improve memory and cognition and help people live better lives.
How is it that we're being impacted by news? And I ask that question because what Zenny62 Media does is it's a smartphone-based platform that uses smartphones to tell news faster, better, cheaper way, but also it allows us to help our clients tell their stories more so than they're being told by somebody else. But
that's fantastic.
Within that, though, is a system where I can go on a YouTube and I can quite literally like a video that I believe is newsworthy, and that video becomes a post on the Oakland News Now.
Oh, wow.
I did all that was because I looked up one day I've covered tons of events, NFL, everything else, and everyone's holding up their smartphone like this, okay?
Yep, sure.
Right?
Yep.
They're holding up their smartphone like this, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, why am I worrying about trying to beat them? It would be great if I could actually own them.
When they're already there, sure. I've been to a concert recently and had the same phenomenon, right?
Exactly. So the answer is to basically be able to go on to YouTube and quite literally like the videos that are already there. And so I don't have to worry about not having
build a news channel out of it.
Yeah, and I can be anywhere in the world doing that. That's my answer to it. But what I find, though, is that there are times when I am overwhelmingly exhausted by all of this. So tell me, in that context, what you're doing with news.
Well, the news is it's a very interesting challenge for the brain in general, but particularly right now. And the reason that news is such a challenge right now, and why a lot of people are feeling overwhelmed by it from a brain perspective, right, from a stress and cognitive performance perspective, is on the one hand, we love news. So Zenny, you picked a good business to be in, right? Every single one of us wants to know what's going on in the world, and we just want to know it now. And in many ways, that's because we're social primates, right? We're interested in what each other are doing. It's important to us to be in our place in the world, to understand what everyone else is doing around us, and so we want to know. In many normal human times, that's fine, right? We can learn a lot about what's going on. We want to know what a pop singer is doing, and we want to know what the news is in China, and we want to find out if there's been events in our neighborhood that we want to catch up on, right? And that's all great. And in fact, news has evolved to give us that, right? When I was a kid, we had news at 6 o'clock. That's when you got the news. You got the printed newspaper in the morning, you got the evening news at night, you got news twice a day, and that was plenty. But of course, CNN invented 24-hour news, and then we've moved on to Twitter and Facebook and Zenny, right? And so we're getting news all the time, and for the most part, that's fine, right? We can dip in and out of it. It's like living next to a river, right? You want to go out and get a drink of water, go ahead and have some. But one important thing to realize about that is news feels good. When we learn something new that's interesting to us, it gives us that little pump of a reward in our brain. It's kind of like eating a piece of chocolate. If I wanted to have a good metaphor, if I wanted to have a bad metaphor, right? It's like taking an addictive drug, right? Our brain gets that little hit of novelty and interest and says, hey, that's great. I'd like some more of that. And so that leads us to, these phenomenons that all of us do right now, even when we try not to, right? We refresh Twitter, right? Want to see what happened in the past 10 minutes. Did the Supreme Court decision on Trump come down? What's the COVID situation like in Georgia? We feel like we need to know it, and we feel like we need to know it because our brains get that reward, right? But the enormous challenge we have right now is that the news is incredibly stressful, right? We're not living in a time of, wonderful news and, everyone's happy and, it's honey all around, right? We live in a world where, hey, we have a global pandemic going on. We have, we have protests in the streets about, injustice in our society that's been with us since our society was founded. And so those two things come together in really a way that can be negative for brain health. We keep scrolling the news because it's rewarding, but the news keeps telling us, wow, we have things to worry about. We're scared. We're worried about ourselves and our families and our friends and our neighbors. And of course, that leads to chronic stress. And I think that's what's happening a lot right now is that we want to consume more news because we perceive that so much is going on. Lots of people are happy to give us more news across different platforms, but our brains, it's not good for our brains, right? So that's that manifests as people feeling stressed. It makes them feel overwhelmed. It makes them, and then all the negative consequences of that, right? We get short with our family and friends. We can't pay as much attention as we want to for our work and our hobbies. Our sleep can suffer. And in fact, even our health and our cognitive performance can suffer, right? We can feel foggy, can't pay attention, can't remember things. And, there's a lot going on, but, an overwhelming stimulus of stressful news can certainly be a part of that.
How much news is too much news?
That's a great question. And, I'm going to give you a terrible answer, I'm afraid, which is, of course, it's different for different people, right? It is different for different people in the same way that, sometimes I think of news as like, how much snacking can you take in your diet, right? Hey, there are some people who have a metabolism where they can eat all kinds of stuff and they're fine with it. And there are other of us who, we have to watch what we eat pretty carefully. And the reason is because every one of us has a different body and a different metabolism. News is that same way for the brain. Every one of us has a different amount of what you might call brain resilience or resistance to stress. And that is going to govern how much of this stress, particularly given by repetitive news, we can take. And so, what causes people to have different levels of brain resilience? Well, the answer is all kinds of things. We can look at people who can tolerate a lot of stress, who have the ability to just kind of keep going in very long, stressful situations. And, the common aspects that you'll see in those people is, well, they have a lot of resilience that they've built up through their life experience and their current situations, right? We look at people who have a strong friend network, right? They have a great set of relationships with their family, both maybe people they're living with and people around them. They have a history where, they have felt in control of their life situation through one way or the other, right? They, for whatever set of reasons, some of luck and some of hard work, right? They've set goals and achieved or exceeded those goals, right? All those things contribute to some resilient brain health. When a lot of stress comes onto that person, or a lot of ongoing stress from the news, through their life history, they know, well, I'll get through this, right? Because I typically have gotten through this. And if I start to break down, I have friends and family I can turn to who are going to support me, and I know I'll get through this. But, imagine a different kind of person, right? Imagine a person who maybe grew up in a less affluent world, right? Where maybe they didn't get some of the things that they worked really hard, right? They might have deserved to get them, but they didn't really get them. And so their brain starts to feel like, hey, I don't have that much control over things, right? Some things just happen to me and I just have to take it, whether I like it or not. And maybe that's a person who doesn't have great relationships with their family and their friends for whatever reason, right? They don't have that network to fall back on. And now imagine some real specific brain health issues. Maybe they fell off a bike when they were a kid and got a mild concussion when they were a kid that never really quite resolved, that weakened their brain function. Maybe they have poor heart health, right? For whatever reason, they have high blood pressure, and so their brain's not getting the blood supply and the food it needs. Well, all that contributes to lower brain resilience, and that kind of person is going to feel more overwhelmed during these periods of times, more stressed.
Hey, I'm curious. Well, first of all, just a programming note, folks. Those of you watching have a question. You can just type it in. If you're new, just type it into the field over there, and I'll put the question up and read it on, and the doctor will answer it. Depending, of course, on the question. But hey, if it's a bad question, I get booted out. Okay, that's the algorithm. But I'm just kidding, sort of. But the whole point is, Doctor, I want to pick up on a subset of that, which has to do with George Floyd and the George Floyd murder and how it seemed to impact everyone. I was thinking about it as I was preparing in my mind for our discussion. And what I keep coming back to is how horrible that video was. And my thought was, okay, it's going to stop at some point. And then you realize it goes on for almost 9 minutes. And none of us have ever seen that before. And it just seems to have created this tidal wave of reaction that has almost like a matter-antimatter converter created this energy of change,
Well, yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it is great that this movement for change has come out of this. And there have been so many events like this, as all of us know. And in fact, they've been going on for decades, right? As someone said, hey, they've always been happening. It's just now that we see them on cell phone cameras, right? And so for whatever, weird confluence of events, that's the one that has pushed us to maybe the point where we're going to see some productive change in this society. So that's good, right? That's good. Of all the badness around that, that's good. But, for a lot of people, the experience of watching that video is, maybe it's important to see it once just so you can appreciate like how horrible that was and what we need to do to change. But for a lot of us, you're on, yeah, right. For a lot of us, you're on Twitter and Facebook, and maybe you didn't see it once, right? Maybe you saw it 5 times, maybe you saw it 20 times, right? And think about what that does to the brain. So, once you've seen it once, you know that you're in enforced passivity, right? And a horrible thing is happening. It looks real because it's in full motion video, and you can't do anything to stop it. You already know how it's going to end, right? You're not even like a regular bystander. Like you're a bystander who knows the future, right? This is work out badly, and you can't take any action. That's terrible for your brain, right? Your brain is designed to, take in the world and convert it into productive action, but you're prevented from taking action because it's just a video. And then think about the repetitive stress of have to see that poor man die like 5-10 times in full motion video in forced passivity. Again, great that it's converted into action, but tough for brain health, right? Our brains are not designed to see that kind of tragedy in that kind of way and be powerless to take any action. And in fact, as I just mentioned, and I think this is what you're calling out, part of what predicts a good response to stress is feelings of control. Psychologists call this a locus of control. Do I believe that I can control the things that happen to me in my environment, or do I believe that I'm a victim of circumstances? And hey, lots of people feel like they're victims of circumstances because they have been victims of circumstances. I'm not trying to blame them. But, you are going to be less psychologically resilient if that's how you perceive the world. And of course, watching that kind of video and being unable to take the action that anyone who's now seen that video known should have been taken, that turns us all into people who have worse locus of control. We feel like we can't control the situation, and that's bad for our brain health. Again, I'm not saying don't watch the video, right? It was a thing that I think many of us had to simply be confronted with. But let's point out what we're talking about here, which is that kind of stuff's tough on brain health.
I almost feel like I had to see it, and once I did, it was because we have 16,000 videos on my YouTube channel alone. I've seen a lot, but I've never seen anything so that was in my face, that was mainstream, that was so abjectly. It was like watching violent. It was like watching this Sopranos episode in 2007. It was a really bad scene.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe that it was happening, but this was worse than that. But it actually happened, right?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. At least, however horrible it might be on TV on The Sopranos, we know it was filmed, right? We know the actor went home at the end of the night, and the special effects crew wiped up all the blood or what have you, and we know we're doing it for our own entertainment, because and there's a narrative story.
And my mom cries when she sees it, even a mention of it.
That's got to be horrible for her, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting. It seems like what I found in working with media as much as I do is there's that gigantic blip where people they see it once, but they don't want to see it again.
Right.
But it seemed to have given rise to all these different interests in these sensational, law-oriented related videos. And
Yeah.
I found where this woman in a local town in Georgia here popped off about how a McDonald's person was treating her, and
Oh,
it went,
I saw that too. Yeah.
yeah, and it went viral. It would carry the most traffic I've gotten on my sites in a long, long time. And I noticed there's this dynamic where, first of all, it generally has to be a woman ranting about something. Generally, and I'm just being honest, generally if she's blonde, it goes up higher, and it attracts an international audience. If it's sensational and somewhat ridiculous, and it always follows that pattern. And it's fascinating how these patterns, come about. But I was wondering if you could respond to, the patterns in news and why we tend to crave news like that as opposed to something else.
I'm a biologist, and what do we know about people is that we're evolutionary related to all kinds of primates, right? Great apes, monkeys, baboons, and you can see exactly the same thing in any kind of primate society, right? If you were a primate anthropologist and you were going to go study baboons in Southwest Africa, what do you see? What do the baboons pay attention to? They have a snack, they sleep. But once someone gets up to it, right? If there's one baboon who's trying to take over to become the alpha, if there's some baboons who are getting together who aren't supposed to be getting together, like every baboon in the troop, they hop right up. Let's have a look. We want to see that. And it's not good or bad. It's just how we're built at some level. So we should try to be better than our biology in many ways, right? We really should, right? We have these huge, enormous brains. We can think about this. Baboons can't really reflect, I think, on whether they should do that or not. It's just kind of what they do, but we can reflect on it. And while we're always going to have that in us, we try to be better in all kinds of ways, right? We read reputable news content rather than just turning in YouTube and looking for car crashes and fires, right? And we read great works of literature and we listen to wonderful speeches that are inspiring and noble. And those call out to our better spirits and make us better people. But there's always going to be a part of us that wants to watch a car crash or a fire or someone fighting on the streets or what have you. And that is kind of how we are. There's always going to be some, but we should try and be better than that, and we should try not to. I think if you dwell on those kinds of things, they can change you. As I mentioned, the lab that I was in, we studied brain plasticity. How does the brain rewire itself through learning and experience? Well, your brain rewires itself when you watch the George Floyd murder 25 times, right? You have a different brain than you did when you started, and you have a different brain than if you'd only watched it once. And, maybe for some people, their brain ends up in a better place because they get motivated to enact social change. And maybe some people, their brain ends up in a worse place because they sort of become inured to it at some level or another. And in that sense, I think we do have to be careful about what we put into our brains and how we think about it. I have a personal story on that front. A couple of years ago, I served as a juror here in San Francisco, and I sat on a terrible, terrible jury. We were, it was a child pornography case. And, almost everyone got off the jury, right? You can imagine they had 200 people in the pool and almost everyone's got a reason they don't want to be on that jury because, it's going to be horrible. It's going to be unpleasant. I ended up on the jury and, the prosecutor in the end felt compelled to show us a couple examples of, what had been found on this man's computer. And it was horrible to watch. And, as a neuroscientist, I knew that information was going to flow in through my eyes. I knew it was going to hit my brain. I knew it was going to change my brain, right? That's how brain plasticity works. And I worked very actively over the next 2 weeks to make sure that I didn't remember that, right? Every time those images came to my mind, I just actively watched something else. I sat down and read a book. I talked to my kids about something fun. And so I tried to almost erase that memory, or at least make sure it didn't become too embedded in my brain because I didn't want to have a brain that had been through all that. And, I think all of this kind of news that comes up, again, some amount of it is good for us to change our brains in a way that's helpful to us, but too much of it is, it can be bad for brain health. It's going to rewire people's brains in a way that, we're not going to really fully understand until it's too late.
And I'll ask,
be thoughtful about what we take in. Let's put it that way.
sure. I want to ask how we can do in the time we have remaining. How can we deal with that? Because one thing that I've noticed, and I'll by way of a story, when I was growing up, my intellectual hero was John Kenneth Galbraith. And for those of you who don't know who Galbraith is or was, Professor Galbraith was a Harvard professor and one of the not so much fathers, but I would say fathers of institutional economics as it is today. And I became interested in Professor Galbraith because I found a book called The New Industrial State.
Oh, sure.
Devoured it and just devoured it. And the concept of the technostructure and everything. And I say all that in detail to say this. No one told me that I should not pay attention to Professor Galbraith because Professor Galbraith was white.
Okay.
By contrast, today, I hear, and if you're watching this and at some point you're young and African-American, want you to pay attention to this, I hear kids saying that if that person doesn't look like me, I don't hear them. Now, I thank God I didn't grow up that way, but I thought more deeply, where did they get that from? And I thought, it has to be social media, something that's consistently communicated as we're talking about. And how can we change that? Because I hold that it will damage a young Black kid's ability to have self-esteem, because I hear a 14-year-old girl saying they don't prize me. And I hear this communicated a lot again and again and again on a daily basis in media. And doctor, it's scaring me that we have this message that, hey, if room before full of white people, you're already out of it. And I'm
glad you know. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
And I'll explain by one more example too, that I was the leader of the YMCA Youth and Government programs in 3 schools in Fort Worth, Texas, when I was an undergraduate at Texas Arlington. I'm not from Texas, but that's another story. A big Cowboys fan. But anyway, the whole point is that
I went to Rice in Houston for college. I spent 4 years as a Texan. And like they say, you might not be from there, but Texas wants you anyway. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had Dunbar, which was my school that was Black and public, Nolan, which was Catholic and white, and the Eastern Hills, which was public and mixed, all in Fort Worth. We Youth and Government teaches kids how to write and argue bills for model legislature, learn how laws are made. So we got together at City Day, and the kids from Nolan were doing this dance called the Gator.
Okay.
It's this floor dance. It's like they get on the floor. It's a gator, right? And I was in there doing it with them. And so my students from Dunbar were all clapped on one bench, and they were looking like, and I came out, dripping wet with sweat. And I said, "What's going on? How come you're not joining us?" And they said, "We're not going to do that dance. It's for white people." And I said, "I order you to get in there." And we got in there, and one kid came out. He goes, "That was fun." I said, "See, and it's that brain wiring that's going on the other way."
Yeah, and I certainly, I'm glad no one told you not to read John Kenneth Galbraith, and I'd hate to think that anyone was telling anyone they couldn't learn from someone of another race or from someone who wasn't like them. I wouldn't want anyone to tell a white kid that they should never read a book by Toni Morrison or watch a movie by Ava DuVernay, right?
Right.
So we want to learn as broad as we can. That being said, what I would say about this kind of aspect of social justice and neuroscience is, I think that a kid who's growing up, and maybe this didn't happen to you, in which case that's fantastic. But I think there are lots of kids who grow up who, if all they see, a young Black kid, if all they see is white economists tell them about economics, if all they look at the astronauts, every astronaut's a white guy, I think there are a lot of kids who start to feel like that's not for them. Now, maybe they have a positive influence in your life, like you were for those kids, to get them to join a dance, who says, "Hey, put that out of your head. You can be an astronaut. You can be an economist." But maybe they don't have that person in their life. And I think actually representation in that way is really important. I think that all of us, again, unconsciously, no harm intended, but I think that, to varying degrees, we look to personal growth, to people who are like us. Now, hopefully less as time goes on, to people like us because of the color of our skin, but that's where we've been in America for quite some time.
But just to tie this in the whole news conversation, what I see happening today is, for example, I watched MSNBC, They had 4 people on saying, "Oh, the payroll protection program never works for minorities, large banks." I got a Zenny 62 me to receive the PPP loan through Bank of America. They were extremely helpful. None of the people on that program actually ran a business. And so I'm yelling at the screen, "Wait a minute, stop putting out this news. It's wrong." And Professor, I hear this again and again and again, and it's pumped out fast.
Yep.
Well, going
part of the challenge with the pace of news these days is it's hard to take time to give a fully considered reaction to things. That's for sure. Maybe what I should say a bit more about this topic is, hey, what can we do about this like deluge of information and the stress that's coming in? And so I thought I'd make kind of 2 points about it. The first of which is,
this is your platform. I love this
platform, but it seemed like a useful thing to talk about for people who are interested in this. Part of it is, hey, how can we manage our intake of news? And the second of which is, hey, how can we build a resilient brain so that, no matter what happens in the news or in our lives, we're stronger to get through it. And so the first part about managing an intake in news is, think of news. People should think of news a bit like they think of snacks, right? Probably most of us have a kitchen. My kitchen upstairs has got a lot of cookies. It's got a lot of crackers, got a lot of nice things to eat like that. And, every time you eat a little bit of that, you're like, oh, that's pretty good. I should have another bite. But we know in the longer run, right, that's not good for us. And we should think about the incredible pace of news that way. And we should think about how to manage and schedule our news intake. Hey, if you like to get up in the morning and you want to spend 30 minutes catching up on Twitter, reading the New York Times, watching some YouTube videos, that's great. But make a time box for it. Make sure you're done and get on with the rest of your life. And then when you're at work or when you're with your family or certainly when you're with your kids, try not to be one of those people who's always got a phone in your hands and you're constantly checking Twitter or YouTube to see what's new, because it distracts you. It pulls you away from the world that you're in. And it contributes in that way to snacking and this kind of ongoing stress. Be present in the moment, right, with those folks. And then, hey, if you at noon or one later on in the day, you want to dive back into it, go right ahead. But, I think people should think of themselves as being in control of their news intake rather than letting the news be in control of them, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing people can do to have a healthier relationship with the avalanche of stuff that's going on right now. But the other approach then is inside your own head, right? What can you do to have a healthier, stronger, resilient brain? Well, we can't go back and change our childhoods, right? If you had a great, happy childhood, good. If you had a terrible childhood, too bad. Either way, it's too late for you and me right now, right? That's just the lives we had. But here are the things we can do right now, right? So if you want to have a more resilient brain, first of all, you actually have to take care of your body. So physical exercise, sleep, and diet are all incredibly important to your brain. And a lot of times people forget, the brain is an organ inside of your skull, right? Just like your heart, which we know is positively influenced by diet and exercise and sleep, your brain is exactly the same way. It needs to be healthy as a body system. And those things are all going to help it be stronger. And so even in these crazy times, right, it's important to, we're allowed to go out, so even if we're under a stay-home order, right, we're allowed to go out and go for walks, allowed to get some exercise, ride a bike, go for a walk, do something at home. Everyone should focus as well as they can on eating right? Even though I got all those cookies upstairs, right? I have a thought about how many I'm supposed to eat and when, and getting sleep, right? It's a terrible time to have a bad sleep schedule. It's a really good time to say, hey, here's my bedtime. I'm going to bed then. I'm going to read a little bit before I go to bed and then get up in the morning. The second thing people can do to improve their brain health and resilience is engage in new learning, right? So the brain exists to learn, and that's a really important thing to think about the brain, right? A lot of people, you ask them, hey, what's the brain for? And they'll say, well, the brain's for thinking. Well, not really for thinking. Thinking might help you or it might not. The brain is there to adaptively change your behavior as your circumstances change. And what that means is when the brain's not learning, it's not healthy. And one of the biggest challenges for all of us during this terrible COVID crisis is, we're not getting a lot of brain stimulation. We don't have to do as much learning as we used to. Now, it sounds like you moved out to Georgia recently, so good for your brain, right? Think of all the learning your brain had to do to shift your life from Oakland to Georgia. That's fantastic for brain health.
It's more complicated in my life. It's part of my life, I think, although I haven't seen it. But I will say that out here and where we are, my stress level goes from 9 to 2.
Well, that's healthy for your brain right there, without a doubt, because stress is bad for the brain. Yeah. But think about someone else, right? Maybe it's your mom or maybe someone like your mom, right? Maybe think about my mom, right? My mom lives in Washington, D.C. And, she used to be out and about, going out for dinner, seeing her friends, going to movies, going to concerts. But for the past 4 months, she's had none of that, right? And so her brain, whether she likes it or not, and she does her best, obviously, but her brain is naturally more in a rut because the days, as people say, every day is kind of like the day before. So that's not good for anyone's brain health. So what can we do to engage in new learning at the home? And, there's all kinds of things depending on people's circumstances, right? If you're quarantining with some other people, maybe some people in your family, it's a great time to pick out some new board games, right? Pick out something, learn to play. Maybe you've always been playing Monopoly, time to pull something else off the shelf or order something from Amazon. Learning the rules and figuring out the strategy and interacting with your family, those are all great things for your brain. Maybe you have a music instrument around the house you haven't played in a while, right? You've had that guitar ever since college and never picked it up. Doesn't matter if you sound good or bad, just practicing, learning, watching some YouTube videos, picking through the strings, all incredibly healthy for your brain. Or listen to a new kind of music, right? That's maybe one genre adjacent to what you usually do, and really work on your brain, right? Follow the lyrics, follow the melodies, hear what's really different. All that stuff.
Tim McGraw for me. I discovered Tim McGraw.
Well, there you go, right?
I actually interviewed him last year, and I thought I'll start listening to him. He's like, "Oh, this is pretty good." So anyway.
Well, my son's in a band, or at least, and of course they're on hiatus. And the style of music they play is Americana. So I've been listening to a lot of Americana over the past year, and it's really, I would say, changed what I can hear and what I can listen for in music. And, finally, I'd be remiss, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, I work at a brain training company. We make a brain training program called Brain HQ. And literally what it's designed to do is, through intensive adaptive practice with these brain exercises, it's designed to speed up your brain and make information processing in your brain more accurate. And, that is designed fundamentally to build a more resilient brain. And, hey, these are exercises people can do on the web. You can do them on your phone or your tablet. And in fact, they're free to try. Anyone who wants to try out whether this is something to help keep their brain sharp during this horrible quarantine and staying home, you can head on over to www.brainhq.com. And hey, register for free. It'll give you a brain exercise every single day. Just something new, something to keep your brain fresh and so forth. And,
Doctor,
subscribe if they want them all. But
I'm going to have you back.
I'd be happy to. It's been fun to talk
again because there's so much. Oh my God, there's so much we can cover about news and media, and
things are changing, and it's an interesting time and an interesting topic. But yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. So
hey, stick around in the backstage, folks. We'll be back in about 5:30 with Paul Cobb of Oakland Post, and then got more coming later. Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube, bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com, and we'll see you in a little bit. Stick around, Doc.
All right. Stay safe and healthy.
I think